Okay, so we're broadcasting now. Hi everyone. It's been a while from our last session on RPA topic. During the last 6 months, we did like 4 or 5 events on the chatbot piece, but RPA was a bit on the back burner. But I think it's time to get back with all these deep sessions, and this is going to be our first session on the process mining. If you guys can see on the screen the results of the poll, can you see it on the screen, guys? I hope it's recording. Let me just stop sharing for now, and I hope the results will be seen. Okay, they're not seen. Okay, so let me just read the questions then. So I just ask one question is, what is your perception of process mining and process discovery? And we have 14 answers so far. 1/3 of answers was that I don't know what it is, so I think it will be a bit of the educational session. 14% said it's the best thing I have ever used, and I'm a bit surprised. I thought it won't be anybody because it's still early days, but look, that's cool. Probably we have people to learn from. Majority answered it might have a potential, but I haven't seen it works in real life. So that's an interesting, very interesting case. I think the majority is definitely on this piece. There are a few people thinking it's too expensive. Nobody thinks it's too difficult to use, which is nice. And 30% say it certainly provides value, but still early days. So we'll see what the result will be at the end of the session. Maybe they will be different. So let me just save this. Okay, I'm ending the poll. Okay, that's why. Now you can see now I'm sharing results. Yep, so majority think about the potential. So I hope that Tuhin will be able to give some feeling of how it actually works in real life. Okay, so let me show our agenda for today. Today is a slightly different event than it traditionally is because we don't have that many speakers. Today we have only me and Tuhin talking, but I would like to use it as an ability to go a bit deeper into the discussion and have more questions from the audience, because I really want to crack this question and to get a sense from practitioners is where it is valuable. And actually, last time we did it, I presented the Mimica to the group. Maybe some of the people here, it was, I think, 2 years ago or a bit more. And yeah, people were quite surprised with achievements so far. So it's going to be interesting to see the progress here. So we're going to have, as our plan, is a presentation from Tuhin about the process mining tool Mimica. Then we are going to have deep dive interview between Tuhin and myself about the process mining from trenches, and they prepare quite a lot of questions that might be of interest. And I would expect, guys, you will ask some questions through chat as well. And then we will have a panel discussion with Meetup members. So I already know that at least 2 people here know the tool and think that it's the best one you ever used. I hope you will be able to join our panel discussion and talk about the topics. So just to remind for the people who are first time here, that there are 3 key pillars of our meetup. The first one, we're talking openly. So this is not a marketing event. We are not trying to present things better than they are. We're trying to really see what is the practical things, what works, what doesn't work, and what we can do to make it work. So that's the whole idea, because the only way we can learn is by sharing our knowledge. Therefore, the second pillar of our meetup is our willingness to share. So whoever is joining us, I hope he will be able to sit next and become a speaker or join a panel discussion or share some feedback. That's the way for learning. And this meetup was created by practitioners, and this is for practitioners. So for people who actually go in and be using these tools and things. And I want to acknowledge the people who helping me in organizing these events, especially on the chatbot topic. We have an amazing team to do. but on RPA topic over time, I had a few people who helped me with this one, and this is extremely important to get a new ideas into what can be done in Meetup, especially in this online event. So I hope more of you guys will be able to join. And I want to thank CPAM for supporting our initiatives with meetups across APAC region. So I have ability to actually do them. And before it was all travel, now it's coming to be online. And especially I want to thank every member of our community for your investment of time. So that's good 2 or 3 hours of your time. And I hope this investment is going to pay off for you. So we'll try to do everything for this. So with this in mind, I think it's time for us to switch to presentation. So Tuhin, all to you. You have a quite engaging presentation, I think. And guys, if you have some questions, then just go and ask. A bit of a background about Tuhin, that we met like 3 years ago, maybe about 3 years ago, when you started this interesting tool. And at that time, I think I told you that I don't believe it's possible to actually do what you are going to present and to show, because it's just too much of the complexity, and the business processes itself is very, very difficult to understand even for people. But yeah, you didn't take my advice, right? You just decided, yeah, I'll go and build it and then show how it can work. So yeah, let's see. And even after 6 months already, I saw there were quite some interesting results. So now I think you have a lot of battle scars to share. So over to you, and then stop sharing.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Pavel. And that is absolutely true. We had quite a few people tell us that this is something that is going to be very difficult to achieve. And it is very difficult to achieve, and it's still something that we're working on today to try to improve as much as possible. So I'm very excited to share with you guys, kind of what the tool is for the people that are less familiar with the space, and a little bit of detail about how it works and kind of what the journey has been like. So now that we're, 2.5 or 3 years in, we've finally gotten some enterprise clients, which is, those are contracts that we basically secured this year. So it really took us, 2.5, almost 3 years to get the product to a point where it was ready. And that was, 3 years of really focusing on one very specific problem. So just to give you guys a little agenda, I'll give an introduction to the product. I'll talk a little bit about how it works. I'll give a demo, and then we can kind of go into the use cases. I'll talk a little bit about the difference between process mining and process discovery. I'll walk through a case study and then talk a little bit about our future roadmap as well. And as I said, please feel free to jump in with questions. Feel free to interrupt me. Happy to answer questions as I go along. Okay, so just to give a quick introduction about the product, we're the market leader in this new category of enterprise software called process discovery. And the way process discovery works, I have a little illustration here. So basically, as employees work on their computer, we record the actions that go into the computer, and then we use those actions to generate business process maps. And maybe what's unique about our process maps is that they capture actions across all desktop applications. So, not just your ERP systems or anything, but, Outlook, Excel, browser, Citrix, bespoke applications, mainframe, terminal, emulation. We're looking at what a single employee is doing on their computer. And then, people use our maps in different ways, but the primary use case that we have really developed our product around is RPA. So I'll talk a little bit about what makes process capture challenging. And everything that you see here, because I'm a software engineer and a machine learning engineer by trade, and my co-founder did a PhD in machine learning. So, we are technologists, And over the last 2.5 to 3 years, we have learned a lot about business process and business process optimization, and spend a lot of time, talking with people like you guys, people in the industry, to understand, what are the challenges that exist. And so, these are all observations that I've had from essentially spending many, many hours on the phone with people in the industry, trying to understand, what makes process capture challenging. So we've seen that processes are very complex. They have lots of variants and exceptions. I think somebody was mentioning this during the chat earlier. And one of the things about RPA is that you need to understand the process at the click and keystroke level, because the bot is actually going to perform these click and keystroke actions into the computer. And at that level, there's a tremendous amount of variation. Other things that we see are that, maybe you have some standard operating procedure, but the process has changed significantly from that. Maybe that documentation doesn't exist. Maybe you have different teams, different regions, all doing the process in, a myriad different ways. And nobody really knows exactly how the process is performed today. And so you have, your happy path, which generally is quite easy to figure out. You can spend 1 hour looking over somebody's shoulder, ask them to do, a couple cycles of the process, maybe ask them some questions, and you can get a pretty good understanding of the happy path of the process. But, as we often see, the actual process is much more complicated. So a tool like Mimica is, you can kind of compare it to traditional process discovery and see what the benefits are. And I apologize because I'm using the same deck that I use for my sales presentation. So, it's a little bit like salesy, but, to just talk about it as it is. One nice thing about Mimica is that you don't need to pull the SME away from their job. So if you're working with a shared services center, for example, that's operating at like 99.9% capacity, it can be difficult to figure out where the opportunities for transformation or automation are, especially when you don't know, what the outcome is going to be of a discovery project. You don't know if there's actually benefit there. So, to be able to capture the process without having to spend a lot of time in interviews with the business, with the SME is, that's a nice kind of feature to have. Also, our maps are going to be more accurate than what a business analyst can produce, because instead of looking at 5 examples of a process, we're looking at hundreds or thousands of examples and generating the map from all of that data. Economical. So, there's an idea that process mining is extremely expensive. And I think that process mining tools like Celonis, for example, are very expensive. But Mimica, which is a process discovery tool, and it's a little bit of a different value proposition and a little bit of a different product, it should be, as expensive or cheaper than what it costs to capture the process with business analysts. And then our maps are data rich. I'll go into an example of that in a second, and you'll see what I mean by that. And before I give a demo of the product, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about how it works. So Mimica has a pretty simple premise, which is that we go to the source of truth, which is the process itself. So rather than relying on people to give interviews or to talk about the process in workshops, we just observe the process as it's occurring, and we use the production data in the process to generate the final process map. So we have a recorder that sits on the SME's computer. And with Mimica, we actually have a start and stop button on our recorder. So you kind of engage and disengage the recorder, whenever you're doing a particular process. We use, of course, machine learning to cluster and clean the data. And some of the most important techniques that we use are something called the alpha algorithm, which generates the final process map. We use a deep learning classifier to remove noise in the process. We also use natural language processing to connect recordings across employees. So for example, in an end-to-end process, you might have different people doing different roles. And so we need to connect those recordings together so that when you observe the process map, you can see the entire thing from end to end. And then we use clustering to identify variants. So in this case, in this example, these are 5 people that all did different roles. So they all do different parts of the process. So you can see that the algorithm automatically identified these 5 clusters. Just to talk a little bit about the natural language processing. So, imagine that each one of these lines is a recording. So you can see like the start point here and the stop point here. And these are each of the different steps that the person performed. So this could be like left click on Google Chrome. This could be navigate to the URL, open up the browser, click on the first search link. So each of these are different actions. And then we're looking at all of the text in those recordings to identify what are the distinctive terms in the recording. So it could be a supplier name, it could be the name of an Excel spreadsheet, but there's going to be something, it could be an invoice number, a supplier number, like a supplier ID, for example. These are all unique identifiers that can uniquely identify a single iteration of the process. So we use NLP to figure out what that identifier is, and then we use that identifier to connect recordings across different days or different teams and so on. Any questions about that or anything I've described so far in terms of how it works? And feel free to type questions into the chat as well, if anything comes to mind. And oh, okay, here, is there something? Oh, here we go. What happens to the data collected? Yeah, so I'm gonna actually describe that in the next slide. So one thing that's really important, and this is, somebody asked earlier, Prabhu asked, how mature is the space? So I think this is a good indication of our level of maturity. Is we spent about 8 months building an anonymization framework that anonymizes all the recorded data. So no confidential or personally identifiable information is persisted. So let's imagine that we have the recorder, which I showed a few slides ago. So the recorder sits on the employee's computer, the SME's computer, and then they use it to do the process. And then the data is encrypted and sent to a central server for processing. That central server could be either on-premise or it could be in the cloud. We've done it both ways. But in either case, both the screenshots and the data goes through OCR and NLP pipeline, and then the screenshots are automatically blurred and the text is tokenized before it's persisted in the database. So let me give a quick demonstration of the product. Now, this is going to be a little bit different from probably what you guys have seen before. As far as I've seen, I've looked at a lot of different tools, of course, Celonis, Signavio, a lot of the different process discovery tools. And I think that from what I've seen, what we're doing at Mimica is a little bit of a step further than anybody else has taken it. And you'll see what I mean in a second. So this is our dashboard. So the dashboard is what you would see, when you first log in to Mimica. So all of your processes would be here. And so the dashboard is really, the purpose of the dashboard is to get the high level metrics about the process. So, and I apologize because I'm in my developer view here. So there's a lot of different kind of random maps that have been created. But what's really important to show is that we capture we're trying to show the ROI for a particular RPA project. So that's really what the dashboard is about. It's about ROI. So when you're computing the ROI for a particular automation, you want to look at the benefit case and then how much it's going to cost to build the automation. So for the benefit case, we capture the daily volume because we're recording every iteration of the process. So we know how many times a day the process occurs. We also know the average handle time. And this one is quite unique to Mimica, as we actually make a prediction of how automatable the process is. And this is really important because you can't really determine whether a process is a good candidate for automation until you figure out how automatable it is. If it's 78% automatable versus 47% automatable, that's a big difference. That's going to impact the ROI calculation. And I'll go into a little bit more detail around how that is computed a little bit later in the presentation. But basically with these three numbers, you can kind of compute, is the percentage purely based on RPA as the tech? That's a good question. Let me come back to that one. I will describe. How do you work with uncertainty in the matching and confidence levels? So David, let me keep going a little bit further in the presentation, and then I'll come back to that question. So now I've talked a little bit about the benefit case, and the point that I wanted to make there was with the daily volume, the average handle time, and the percent automatable, you can compute how much time you would expect to save if you built this automation. And then on the complexity score, these are some of the metrics that we capture: the number of clicks, the number of keystrokes, the number of decisions, the number of applications, the number of screens. And actually we have a backend that's configurable on this. And so you can actually choose a bunch of different metrics that we have, basically we talk to our clients and we ask them, what metrics do you want to see here? And then a couple of ones that we came up with recently were the number of input fields, the number of business rules, application types. So if it's Citrix, for example, that would get flagged. So essentially you can think of it as customizable. At the end of the day, like I said, we're technologists. And so we just ask our clients, what is the right thing to put here? And then we actually came up with our own formula for complexity, but a lot of times our clients have their own formula so they can configure their own formula on the back end. And then it's really just Mimica's responsibility to make sure that we're getting all the data points correctly. We're accurately getting the number of input fields. We're accurately getting the number of screens or applications or application types, et cetera. And then, some of our clients asked us for some additional information. So we started creating these cards this year where we have the applications used, and you can see what percentage of the time in the process is spent in each of the different applications. Also the distribution of the handle time, and then the distribution over the days of the week. And again, I'd be very curious to know if you guys have certain cards that you'd want to see that are not here now. It's kind of, constantly evolving. And then, our real kind of bread and butter is the process map. And so this is a high level process map, and it's for an accounts payable process, or part of an accounts payable process, I should say. And you'll notice that at first glance, it looks a little bit like a BPMN diagram. You have a start node here, a stop node here, and then you have decision points that represent these big branches in the process. I guess what's nice about Mimica is that when you zoom in on a particular step in the process, you can see what percentage of the volume went through that step. So you can see here, 87% of the volume went this way. And then there was a branch here where 84.6% went this way. And then 2.6%, there was this duplicate invoice error. And so the process went this way. You can also see how much time was spent in each of the different steps. So 1 minute, 42 seconds, 1 minute, 4 seconds here. So anybody that is, a business user or a high level, could be somebody at the C level even, can look at this process map and get a good sense of what the different steps in the process are, how long each one takes. And then we also put these colored circles here that are our predictions for which steps in the process are automatable. So I kind of referenced that earlier with the 78% automatable. So that's broken down here on a step-by-step level. And then, I think what's probably special about Mimica is that for each of these different steps, you can click on it and see on the right panel here all the different actions that the user performed. So you can see that they read the business unit from the invoice, they write the business unit, they read the supplier name, write the supplier name, and if did an invalid value error occur? No. Continue to 12.8. Otherwise, if yes, select OK on invalid value error. So the logic of the process has been captured here in the right. And if you take, any single one of these steps, for example, here they write the invoice date, we can actually drill down into this step even further and see exactly what writing the invoice date is. So I'll click on it here, and that'll open up a third panel on the right where I can see the individual clicks and keystrokes for that particular action. So if I open up this one here, we can see that they left click on the dropdown. They click on this button here. They select May. There's an event here that represents that May has been selected. They select 1. And now you have an event here that shows May 1st, 2020. This was in India, so it's it's month, day, year. So May 1st, 2020. So our goal here is to capture all of the information needed to build an automation and present it in a way where if you're a high level business user and you just want to see, what the process looks like, where the time in the process is spent, you can do that and just see the high level map. Or if you want to, you can drill all the way down into the details and see, exactly at a click level how the process is being performed. Yeah, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in the product demo, but basically, you can then export this into, you can export this to a PDD, you can export it to CSV, you can export it to BPMN. There's a lot of different stuff, we have variant filters and that kind of thing, but I'm not going to go into a ton of detail around that. When we have the users record a process, is the assumption that it will always be a single process, or can it be multiple processes, for example, order creation and payment reconciliation? Yeah, that's a good question. So in the vast majority of cases, our recorders are built for a single process. And so, let's say you have 10 people doing order creation and payment reconciliation. If you wanted to capture the processes at the same time, we would recommend that you record 5 people doing order creation and 5 people doing payment reconciliation. In terms of whether we can do one recorder or multiple processes, yeah, we do have that capability. We use the same clustering algorithms that we use to identify variation, basically to segregate processes. It's just maybe a little bit less mature, that technology. So we prefer to go with the single process approach and split it up among the people who are doing the process if possible. Okay, well, lots of questions. So how should recommend the clients approach this? Can you take us through an example? Yes, I will go through an example a little bit later. Can you get cycle time data since that can determine the customer experience? Can you get cycle time data since that can determine customer experience? So yes, so that's a good question, Suparna. So we do get cycle time data. We're currently not displaying it in the process map, but we do have a CSV export where all the data in Mimica can be exported out. And so you can get the cycle time data that way. But that's a good point. That might be something that we want to include in our process maps or in the dashboard in the future. In the future, would you see options to run this open across all transactions on a desktop? Yeah, absolutely, David. That's definitely where we're headed in the future. Again, it's a very difficult technology to build. And there are companies that have recorders that just run continuously on the desktop across all transactions, but there's a trade-off because the level of detail that they're able to provide in their process maps is not the same as what we're able to provide with Mimica. But that is certainly where we're headed. And we are actually already investing in technology to automatically identify the start and stop point of processes so that we can essentially segment the processes as they're occurring on one person's machine. So it is on our roadmap, and I expect it'll be in the product in the. Okay. Of the percent, the column at the most is low and high. Does that mean Mimica is unable to process the request or is still able to require a long time to learn? So the complexity score does not refer to Mimica at all. It refers to the RPA developer's ability to build an automation. From Mimica's perspective, there's no such thing as unable to process the request. We generate a map regardless of how automatable a process is. It could be 0% automatable and Mimica will still generate a map for the process. But the complexity just means that using RPA and maybe OCR, and other kind of off-the-shelf technologies, it would be difficult. How difficult would it be to automate that process? It is recording the client's information. Is it going to save the client's data in any local drive or any database or cloud? If it's saving the data, they don't save sensitive information. Okay, so yeah, just to remind you, we have this data anonymization framework. So, as you can see here in the screenshot, the sensitive information has been automatically blurred. And so, just to be clear about that, we are recording client data, but we're also masking sensitive information. And then we can store the data either in the cloud or in an on-premise environment as well. Okay, so I want to talk about the RPA use case. Why we started this company, why we went on this journey at all. So as we started learning about RPA, there's kind of this metaphor that I like to use, which is that the purpose of an RPA program is to juice lemons. This is kind of how I think of it, is like in a business, you have these fields of lemon trees and each one of them has a lemon on it or many lemons on it, which are all automation opportunities. And we want to go and try to get as much juice as we can from each of these lemons. And so when I try to think about the technology that we build, I try to think, okay, how can we improve this, this kind of lemon juicing process, to go with the metaphor. So the way that we do it today is we kind of do this like squeeze, what I call the squeeze test. So we pick up the lemon, we try to see, how heavy it is, and we shake it around a little bit and squeeze it and try to figure out how much juice is in the lemon, based on that. And it's not very precise, you could say. And then we take the ones that we think have the most juice, and then they go on this conveyor belt. And then you have this juicer builder, which is essentially like a business analyst and an RPA developer. And one of the problems in RPA is that it takes so long to actually build a single juicer for a single lemon that you have to be very careful about which lemons you put on the conveyor belt. You need to pick, the right ones. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of time building a juicer and not getting that much juice out of the lemon. And one of the most common things that happens is you do the production rollout, you see how much juice you get out of it. And then, if there's not enough in the UAT or in the production rollout, that lemon goes back on the conveyor belt and you kind of rebuild the juicer. So we kind of looked at this, and all the decisions that we make around the software are around how to improve this particular process. And that's really the question, is like, can this system that we've developed now be significantly improved with new technology? So when I think about Mimica and how I asked the product team to build the software, I'm really thinking about two key metrics. One is the number of lemons juiced. So how many lemons can you get on the conveyor belt in a year? And how can you maximize the average juice per lemon? And, of course, like if you take these two metrics together, that's going to be your sort of like annual juice, is like the number of lemons that you juice and your average juice per lemon. So you can increase the average juice per lemon by picking better lemons. And you can also increase the average juice per lemon by making sure that when you actually automate a process, you're getting 95, 96%. So the accuracy of the process map and the accuracy of your prioritization are things that can increase this. And then the number of lemons juiced, that's going to come down to how long it takes to build the RPA. So we want to cut the time that it takes to build the bot. So if you can cut the time it takes to build the bot, let's say in half, or to deploy the RPA in half, then you can double the number of lemons that you juice per year. And that's, essentially when you think of like the value of our product, at least, I can't speak for anybody else in the market, but like this is what we think about at Mimica. So a couple of things, like capturing all the exceptions and variants up front so that lemons never get put back on the conveyor belt. So a lot of time in RPA is actually spent in the rollout, realizing that you've missed a bunch of variations and then putting them back on the conveyor belt and rebuilding it. So that's dead time. That shouldn't be happening. If we generate maps using the production data in the process, then we won't run into variations that we haven't seen before. So those last like 3 weeks or whatever, 3-4 weeks are going to be eliminated. Also, accurately capturing the exceptions and variants is important because it sort of increases the number of potential opportunities. So if medium processes become simple to automate and high complexity processes become medium, all of a sudden that's improving your ROI calculation. And then the third kind of point that I want to mention is around agile development. So what's nice about, so this is just an example of, let's say, 8 weeks. I have 3 weeks for discovery here and 5 weeks for development and testing. I understand that this is going to vary a lot. Some people will do 2 weeks of discovery. Some people will do 1 week of discovery. Generally, people that are doing 1 week of discovery are spending a lot more time in development and testing, or they're only building their bots to like 80%, to capture 80% of the process, and then they move on to the next one. So my claim with Mimica is that you can do agile development, but still capture the majority of the process. And so like the way that we do that is, because we're generating our maps with production data, you can actually begin development after week 1. So that's something that I was mentioning earlier is, 1 week in, you can already start building the automation. And that's really critical because it means that, you can be doing a lot of the work in parallel. A lot of the RPA initially is kind of setting up the framework and making sure that all the key steps in the process are being automated. And if you have the happy path, you can do that. Meanwhile, while that development is happening, the map is iteratively improving as it's recording more data. So, all of the, the 5% variations and the 3% variations and the 1% variations, those are all being captured so that the developer can iteratively develop and improve the bot as the timeline goes on. So does that kind of make sense? The RPA use case? maybe like the value proposition around RPA?
Yeah, it's very interesting analogy about lemons. Very, very.
So there are two kind of use cases that people use the technology for, or whenever people see our process maps, there are really two use cases that they think of. So one is RPA, the robotic process automation use case. That's the one that I just talked about. And then there's the business process optimization use case. Now, this is actually where I think process mining is maybe a more powerful technology. And I think process mining is actually less powerful in RPA. I know that process mining companies have really marketed themselves as being very useful for RPA, but it's very difficult for me to understand how that can be the case when they're not looking at what the person is doing on their computer, all the data in the process, understanding how the data travels through the process, how automatable the process is. Those are critical points to understanding which processes you should automate and how to build the bot. So my sense is that process mining companies have recognized that there's an opportunity in RPA and are kind of ramping up their marketing to market themselves as something for that use case. But I'm not sure that it's the best tool for RPA. And then similarly for business process optimization, I don't think that process discovery tools are the best for business process optimization. I think that we can get there, but it's not something that's kind of like in the product today. So I just want to talk about this difference between like process discovery and process mining. And, I think we're still trying to figure out to some extent, is it like, with John Travolta and Nicolas Cage here face off where we're really competing against one another, or are they complementary? And I think there's a little bit of both, but I'll kind of go into my view on process discovery and process mining. So Celonis is probably the market leader in process mining. And they had this idea in 2011 that they could figure out what a business process looks like by learning the ERP system. So they would look at the transactions in the ERP system and use those transactions to generate process maps. And then Mimica came along 7 years later and said, we want to actually learn the employee. So we want to learn what a single user is doing across all desktop applications on the computer. And so the key from a data science perspective, or like from a engineering perspective, Celonis generates its maps based on logs from ERP systems, whereas Mimica generates from clicks and keystrokes. Every time a user clicks on a button or types something in, that becomes our fundamental data set. Whereas Celonis is looking after the transaction has already occurred. They get a single log for the entire transaction, and that's how they know how often certain transactions are happening. So if you think from like L1 to L5, this is sort of how I think of Mimica and Celonis. Celonis can give you the L1 to the L3, and then Mimica is going to give you the L4 to the L5. And this is really why I say business process optimization versus RPA. In RPA, it's all about the clicks and keystrokes. It's all about the low-level variation. It's all about that text box where you're copying some data in and it doesn't match the dropdown correctly. And so you need to program a table into the bot where the data is being transformed, in order to select the appropriate thing from the dropdown. That's not L1 to L3. That's not business process optimization. Business process optimization is, just figuring out, like, at a high level, where the time in the process is being spent. What are the deviations from the process? What are the exception cases? But it's not about the low-level clicks and keystrokes. So if you have, let's say this is your business process, and it's very complex, process mining is going to give you like the highways and the main streets and this roundabout, this little loop in the process that happens here. And when you're doing business process optimization, you want the 80-20, right? So it doesn't make sense to go into all of these details with process mining. You just want the 80-20 of the process. You want to figure out at a high level, where's the time being wasted. But with Mimica or with process discovery, you need, like for RPA, you need all of these little side streets, all the different edge cases and ways that the process can occur if you want to build a bot that can actually automate the process like at a low level. And then, you know, the point that I make is that processes are more than just ERP systems, right? You've got your email client, you've got your spreadsheet, you know, Excel, your PDF reader, your document management software, your queue management software. You know, we work a lot with banks where they've got hundreds of systems, you know, like countless systems. And so just looking at the transactions is not going to show you how to automate a process, you know, end to end when you're working in this kind of a complex environment. So just to kind of recap on this, I think process mining is super valuable for business process optimization. And that can maybe inform your decision about where to look for automation opportunities. For example, you know, let's say you have your procure to pay process and you realize with Celonis that there's some big branch in that process that's taking a long time. You could think that maybe I would want to automate that because there's a lot of time being spent there, but you cannot possibly know how automatable that actually is. When you want to figure out really how automatable it is, again, you're going to send business analysts to interview the people and ask, you know, what does that data entry actually look like? What are the documents that are being used? Are they structured, semi-structured? You know, all that kind of stuff, all the kind of things that we do in RPA, you know, process mining software is not going to answer those questions. It can give you an indication of where to look, but after that, you still have to do your homework. And then maybe just to be fair about it, there are a lot of things in Mimica that you can't do that you can do in Celonis. For example, like, you know, Celonis can do all of these simulation of like, oh, if I modify the process this way, then the efficiency of the process will increase by this percentage. You know, this is how many dollars are being spent like in the process, you know, on an annual basis, all that kind of analytics. Those are things that we don't have in the tool today. We'd like to build those things in the future. But, you know, if you just look at the product today, those would be some of the strengths of process mining over a process discovery tool like Mimica. And yeah, the other thing is like, I think process mining is significantly more expensive than process discovery. So like process discovery would be thousands for a process, whereas process mining would be like hundreds of thousands. So it's very different. But I also think part of that is because we're a small company and we're still trying to figure out our pricing. So I think our pricing is probably too low right now, but that's normal, I guess, for a startup. I think we're still trying to figure out, you know, what the value of the product is. But if you just look today, like if you were to buy Mimica today or buy Celonis today, it's going to be orders of magnitude higher. Yeah, so I'll just walk through like a simple kind of case study here. So we did this stock price research process for a major US bank. 15 employees doing the process, 92,000 man hours per year, and about 760,000 in annual spend. So generally, you kind of start with some idea of a process that you might want to automate. I think Prabhu was asking a question about this of like, how do you really use Mimica? So generally, we're working with a center of excellence or an RPA team. And this team has a book of processes that they want to maybe look at this year. And a lot of times what teams do is they will collate ideas from different people across the business. So maybe they'll send a spreadsheet around and say like, can you fill out this spreadsheet with all your different ideas for RPA? And so you kind of fill out the spreadsheet and then and normally you would then send business analysts to do an initial let's say like feasibility assessment or just an initial assessment of whether this could be automatable or not. So the point at which you would send in business analysts to start analyzing the process, that's where you can bring in Mimica. So let's say you have a spreadsheet of like 50 processes or 100 processes. You can use Mimica just for a couple days for each process and get a high level understanding of like, okay, what does the happy path look like? What are the key metrics in the process? What's the average handle time? And that sort of thing. Just like really basic metrics about the process. In this case, I'm just going to talk about one specific process that we did end to end, but you can use it that way as well to do prioritization across many processes. And then when you've picked 5 that you really want to focus on this quarter, then you can go and do, a full 1 week, 2 week, 3 week process map. So in this one, again, we captured valuable information about the process, like average handle time, 4 minutes, 55 seconds. 80% of cases fell between 3 and 8 minutes. The percent automatable was really critical because when we found that it was 82% automatable and, the process was occurring 1,300 times a day, they thought, okay, let's definitely automate this process. And they actually used Mimica to build a bot. One thing that's interesting about Mimica is that you can look at the cases that take the longest and figure out, what the steps were there. So it can give you some insight into the process as well. This example, they didn't have any major insights, but we did have one client where 30% of the time the process was being sent. So the process had a step where the customer had to send some information to the bank, and they were sending it via fax. And what they found with Mimica was when the data was being sent by fax, the process was taking significantly longer. I can't remember exactly how long, but it was like twice as long, something like that. And 30% of it was coming in through fax. And they looked at the clicks and keystrokes and the screenshots, and they figured out from the screenshot that actually it's because the driver's license ID was blurry. Like it was coming out really dark from the screenshot. When they saw that in the screenshot, they realized that that was happening because of the fax. And so they kind of like actually made a process transformation on the back of that, where they pushed people not to send the information via fax anymore. They had already a system that was like non-fax related. And so they actually made an effort to get people to use that system instead of the normal fax. So that's an example of where like the clicks and keystrokes and the screenshots can help give you some insight into, how the process is happening and why it's taking a long time, for example. And then again, like our key bread and butter is showing the clicks and keystrokes and the screenshots for every single one. And they built a bot for it, and they actually automated the 82%, which is, that's, we got a question here, top 5 most common process types, which are most automatable in companies. Yeah, that's a good question, Nadia. Let me come back to that. So as I mentioned, we kind of showed our maps at different levels of hierarchy. So this was present in that map as well. And really to kind of, round this out, I guess you could think of Mimica as building the next generation of tools for process capture by looking at what individual employees are doing on their computers. We can generate PDDs for RPA and automation. And then eventually we'd like to be able to do some of this other transformation related stuff as well. Process reengineering, employee training, modifying the system, automation. And our final vision for this, as David mentioned, for this kind of process capture tool is to be able to capture the process, the entire, like be able to record continuously and be able to give live up-to-date information about how a process is occurring and where our name came from. So Mimica comes from the idea that, I don't know if you guys can see the GIF here, but we got the little baby like copying the dad. And, this is really where the idea for Mimica came from, was that in the same way that humans learn, when a baby's born, it learns by observing the world around it. So if you stand like that, like in the GIF, or you put your finger to your nose, the baby is going to copy what you're doing. And it doesn't necessarily understand everything that it's doing, but it's able to reproduce the action. And that's really where the idea of Mimica comes from, is that we want to build AI that can learn to automate work as a baby learns to walk. By observing and mimicking the world around it. And the process discovery technology that we're building is really kind of our proof of concept, in a way that this vision that you can build an automation by directly observing it is possible. So I'll kind of close on that note. I know that there was at least one question from Nadia that I'll get to, but I will kind of leave it there for now. Let me just plug a couple of things quickly. So please visit our website, mimica.ai. You can read more about the product and the company there. Please feel free to contact me at info. You can reach me at info@mimica.ai is going to end up in my email address, or my first name is Tuhin, so tuhin@mimica.ai. You can also reach me there. And you can also reach me. This is actually my cell phone number, so you can reach me directly on my cell phone by calling me at this number. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. And I will leave it there for now, and maybe I can kind of open up the floor to some final questions if we have any, but I'll start, please post them in the chat. And in the meantime, I'll answer Nadia's question about the top 5 most common processes, which are most automatable in companies. So yeah, the top 5 most common process types. Yeah, it's actually a difficult question, because it really depends on where in your RPA journey you are. But what I will say is that there are some areas where there tend to be a lot of automation opportunities. So for example, in finance, yeah, if you haven't done any automation yet, so I would say, finance, HR, IT, and operations, those are some of the key ones. Now, if you're looking like from business to business, every business's operations are going to be a little bit different. So that's why finance is kind of a good one, because every business has like a finance business unit. But yeah, if you're talking about, banks, like things where loan applications are being processed, those kind of maker checker processes where you capture loans. In insurance companies, you have your claims process whereby a claim is being generated. Any kind of invoice related process, anything data entry related. IT processes, you have things like, setting up new computers. In HR, you have employee onboarding, pre-employment verification, depending on what region you're in, some people do that process, differently. Yeah, I think those are some of the good ones, like, I don't know. So just to actually give a few concrete ones, let's say like accounts payable, accounts receivable and finance. Let's say in operations, it's going to depend on the industry, but let's just say, loan, any kind of maker checker loan process or claims processing for insurance. And for HR, let's say onboarding, that might be a good one to look at. There's actually there's a good resource. I think like UiPath has a pretty good one of like UiPath most automatable processes. I think they have a list or something. If you email me, Nadia, I can send it to you. But they have a list that has like a breakdown across all the different areas and where the best opportunities are. What platforms does it support? Salesforce, Pega, etc. Is there a list? Bharat, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. So maybe you could clarify the question a little bit. Are you saying in terms of what we can record, what applications we can record out of or capture? Yeah, so Mimica there's no integration with Mimica. It's a universal desktop recorder. So it automatically integrates with all desktop applications completely out of the box. So any desktop application or even Citrix, we automate. There's no list of applications we can record everything. There's no connectors is what I mean to say. So there's no we don't have to integrate with Salesforce or integrate with Pega. We're hooking into the operating system. So when a click happens or a keystroke happens, we query the operating system to understand what is the element that was interacted with. And then in the cases where we can't query that element, we use image processing.
So basically the answer is that if the particular system you can't identify object, and sometimes it happens, it's difficult, you're just using the OCR basically to extract the element, right? So it's similar way exactly. Like you would do for Citrix. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not.
I think
we kind of.
Yeah. Go on. I think we're kind of smoothly moving into the interview mode. We're starting. There are a lot of questions, so guys, yeah, thank you very much for the questions. I hope we can answer them. But I'd like to switch to a bit of interview mode with Tuhin, and you can still have your screen here. Okay, so let me try to put them back to back, if possible. Our two videos. I think there is an option. I saw this option in Zoom, but now I can't see it. Where is it now? Interesting. It was before. You know how to do it side by side?
Side by side. I'm not a Zoom expert.
No, that's funny because when you were presenting, I had this option on top, but since you stopped presenting, I don't see it anyway. Okay, I think it will still be able to capture all videos. Okay. Yep. So there are definitely quite a lot of questions asked, and be going into depth on this one. Yeah, I had some warming up questions. I don't think we need any warm up anymore. Pretty much warmed up. But the few things that's interesting I'd like to ask. So what would be the couple of things that are obvious to you now, but that you didn't think of before when you just started?
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, when we started the company, we didn't know anything about business process, right? We didn't know anything about what it's like to see the data of a person doing a process on their computer. So the first version of Mimica, I actually have I can show you guys quickly what the first version of Mimica looked like. So let me just share my screen quickly. This is actually pretty funny. And this is a little Easter egg. I don't think anybody knows about this. Let me see if it still works. So this is the first version of Mimica. We were actually doing a pilot with EY. And so we didn't have any, this was what's interesting is we didn't have groups of the data at a high level. So that was probably the biggest thing that I didn't understand, or we didn't understand, is how much variation there could be in the process. We kind of thought that when people do the process, they're going to do the same clicks. They do the process so much and so frequently that they're always going to do the same clicks. And so our process maps actually just had clicks in them. And now you can see our process map. We have 3 levels of abstraction. We have the clicks here in the right, and then we have these steps, and again we have the high level steps. So that's probably the biggest transformation that we've made to our process maps. And what I didn't realize is, and it seems obvious now, is when people are doing processes, they're forgetting what they're typing, so they're alt tabbing back and forth between different screens. They're changing the song they're listening to. They're getting a Microsoft Teams message from a friend, and they're saying, ha ha ha, oh, I'm recording Mimica right now. There's so much noise when people are doing the work on their computers. And So yeah, it seems a bit silly now that like the first version of our map just showed clicks and keystrokes. But when we tried to actually show many iterations of a process like this, it was just like chaos. It was mayhem and just looked like spaghetti where you had like, you couldn't read it. It was not intelligible to a human.
Yeah, I think this was the map I showed to the guys a couple of years ago. It still was pretty impressive one at that stage, but you see how far you went with this one. Okay, yep, that's a good one. Now, the second question, and yeah, I love your analogy about these lemons. And I think Nadia has a similar questions. So if you're just starting, right, and you don't know which process you need to apply Mimica on, so your idea was that you probably have some book of work or some COE. So what if you don't? Mm-hmm. What are you going to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that the requirements for using Mimica are very, very minimal, but there are some requirements in the sense that you can't just leave the software running on the computer, 24 hours a day. So you need to have some indication of what you want to capture. You don't need to know if it's going to be a good candidate for automation. You don't need to know how automatable it is. You don't need to know much about it. You really just need to know, this is a process. So, what I would suggest and what a lot of people do is if you pick a business unit where there tend to be lots of opportunities for automation. Let's say operations is a really good one. Finance is a really good one. IT, HR. Let's just take those four groups. You can just pick one, let's say operations or finance, and go talk to one of the leads and just say, are there any processes that are repetitive that you think could be automated? And they don't need to be right. They don't need to be correct, but they just need to know or you could even say, give me a list of like the 10 processes that you perform. Now, for somebody that doesn't know about operations or finance, that might seem a little bit daunting because, you might not be aware of how those business units function. But I can guarantee you that when you talk to those people and you ask them what their processes are, they will know. They will know all their different processes. They will know who are the people that do those processes, and they'll have names for all those processes because all of the work in those business units is structured around processes. So if you go to them and you say, hey, just give me 10 processes, let's say, and tell me who the people are that do those processes, that's really enough. And then you can use a tool like Mimica to get the answers of whether you can actually go about automating it and what the looks
so
like.
basically within Mimica, there is no like particular idea of framework how to do that, but there are options, obviously. So how to do it. So you start and once you identified something. Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair enough. Okay. Now I think the Prabhu is really waiting for this question about how much does it cost, and that's what we discussed. And before we had this discussion with you, my perception of the process mining and process discovery was that it is expensive, right? And the definition as well, like probably we need to like clarify what is process discovery, what is process mining. So within your framework, the definition is process discovery. It's level 4, level 5 things with the clicks, exact things like you do on a desktop. And process mining is more for L1 to L3 processes where you're actually looking for the whole optimization. And yeah, that's fair. That's fair definition. I saw many different ones where process mining part of process discovery, and process discovery is a broader topic. Or otherwise, like process mining is broader, process discovery just piece of it. So it's really at the moment is not that clear. But let's stick to definition that process discovery is L4, L5 processes up to the click level, and process mining L1, L3. So in terms of the costing, most of the tools I know about in this topic are definitely in dozens of thousands. So it's definitely not within a single digit of thousands, probably tens or maybe hundreds. Yeah. And this makes them applicable only for the big processes in the big companies. So what would be the typical cost of one process discovery with Mimica, or like the range?
Yeah. So, I mean, I probably shouldn't go into like really specific pricing, but what I can say is definitely like single digit thousands, and like what I can say also is like it should be, probably, and this is our pricing today, but our pricing will change. But today, at least, and probably through the rest of 2020, our next pricing update is going to be in January. It would be, like certainly cheaper than what it would cost with business analysts.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And basically, saying like it's a typical like cost of automation of process. Yeah, I have different numbers, but let's say between 20 and 100,000. And the analyst part is maybe 1/3 of it and sometimes half of it, right? So the Mimic couldn't and shouldn't typically cost more than like a half of the cost of analyst. Otherwise, like why would you go, right? So maybe at the same level. So, and that's why the process mining tools are a bit outpriced from this type of processes, but it can be applied for the processes where you have significant value, obviously. Okay. Now, I know that in early days, when you did automation, you had to use your data scientist, right? On a kind of, it's like from the movie of Man in Black, right? When it's sitting somewhere in the middle, I can do it some work sorting manually. Is it still the case that you have to do it sometimes, or it's now much more automated?
So both of those things are true. It is much more automated, but we still do have, some manual intervention involved. However, the manual intervention that's involved is no longer like a data scientist, but we do still have a little bit of manual intervention involved. Our goal actually is to get that, to zero as quickly as possible. And that's not to say that we'll ever get to a point where there's zero manual intervention. I think that, my strong opinion on this is that data can only really tell part of the story, and that part of the story will always be told by the people who actually do the process, like every day. They have so much information in their heads about the process, the nuances of the process, why certain things happen that you just can't get with data. So that's one of the things that that's one of our philosophies around the tool, is like we want to kind of combine human intelligence and machine learning to generate the final process map, where when appropriate, we'll take a little bit of data from the SME and then use that to guide the algorithms. And that's, we don't want it to be a data scientist. We want it to be like maybe the SME is answering some basic questions about the process in order to kind of guide the algorithms. So that's where we're headed in the very near future. Now we do get information from the SME, but we might ask them that information directly during the creation of the process map. In the future, like it'll all happen with the software.
So in your presentation, you mentioned the typical comparison with typical process mining tool like Celonis or maybe Signavio or maybe Process Gold. What about the tools like Cryon, who has process discovery? Have you like looked at them, compared them, and like make your opinion on this?
Yes. So I have looked at Cryon. What I will say is I have not seen them produce process maps that I think are sufficient to build an RPA using them. That's my analysis of it. So I don't think that they're there yet, is my opinion. And that has also been corroborated by people that I've like we've done pilots where we've been compared against Cryon. In some cases, the consensus was that, again, like the tool is not there yet. The other thing that is true about Cryon is that it does come packaged with their RPA solution. So there's no way to really like use Cryon process discovery without using Cryon's RPA product. And so that can, you know, of course you can take that as you will. Like Mimica is vendor agnostic. You know, we don't really care what vendor you're using on the other side. We're just there to help you build the automation. But, you know, again, like I definitely encourage everybody to try all the tools that are out there. If you have the budget, you know, go try the other tools, try Cryon, you know, try like UiPath has, you know, a tool out there. And, you know, that way, like the more educated people are, you know, the better. And the better for us, because then if they say nice things about Mimica, they come from like a more informed place. So yeah, definitely encourage you. But yeah, I haven't really seen, I think it's like, it requires a lot of focus to do what we do. So I think if you're a startup and you've got an RPA product that you're trying to get right, and you're trying to do process discovery, that would be very difficult. If you're a company like UiPath, where you have like hundreds of millions in funding, then, you know, you probably have a better shot at it, I would say, than a company like that.
Yeah, but focus, I think, is a crucial, right? Because if you not succeed in the key thing you do, then you kind of toss, right? Okay. So another question, you mentioned that the end game for you would be to be able to actually produce maybe an RPA script, right? In terms of complexity, what do you think is a more complex task, to actually understand the process and build this map and all of the variations, or actually the build the robust execution of the process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that understanding the process is harder, I would say. So, you know, like if you think of whenever you're trying to reproduce a task, first you want to understand it and then you want to execute it. The execution of the task is just like mechanical, like you're just performing a sequence of actions. So the hard part is actually understanding the logic behind those actions. And so being able to derive that logic from the observation of the process, that's the really hard part of what we're doing at Mimica. And so that's why, again, coming back to the focus thing, we're like really focused on getting that. We want to be the best in the world at that. And I think there's an interesting like delta between the process as it's recorded and the to-be process, I guess, or how the bot would perform it. So that's an important thing of like, we don't necessarily want to be executing the processes exactly as they're recorded. So at some point we will have to build some tools that will bridge that gap between, you know, the recorded process and the to be. But once I kind of how I imagine it today is like you make some adjustments like within Mimica, and then you can push a button and like generate the script. But yeah, there's still some things to be figured out there.
Yeah, I think that one very small nuance, but it's very, very important, right? You typically don't want to automate exactly the same way as it was performed by a human, because we optimized our process for our performance, right? Not for like performance of the bots, and there are a lot of options what can be done. Okay, that's a good one. Okay, yeah. So I think we analyzed the cost and things. Okay. So tough questions. So what would be the 3 most annoying problems for you to solve in current process mining landscape? Maybe 2.
Yeah, no, I mean the annoying problems all have to do with, so you know, our company is really only focused on one thing, right? We're just trying to generate like accurate metrics and accurate process maps. That's really like what we do. The metrics is actually easy. That's not even hard. So if we can do maps well, then everything else it comes after that. So like the annoying things are technical, I would say. They're like quite technical. and they all have to do with the fact that there are an infinite number of ways to do any action in a process. Like I was giving an example of like logging into a website, or I can give another one of like downloading a website. I mean, you could like right click and then click download, like view source, and then like copy it and save the HTML, or you could right click and save the page as, or you could use a downloader. Maybe you go to a website, you download a downloader, you configure the downloader to download that web page. There's like literally for any step in a process, there's an infinite number of ways to do it. And so to go back to, and I think David was saying earlier, like, how do you get this to the point where it's just running on the computer continuously? It really comes down, it's really a question of how do you simplify all that complexity? And I would say it's more than annoying, like it's like a difficult technical challenge, and that's really like, that's really what we spend our time on. Half of our company is data scientists, and so that's really like the bread and butter, is how do we figure out what's important to the process and what's not important? That's really what we're trying to figure out. I know that's like very technical. What annoys me in particular is more maybe on like the marketing, like we're technologists, right? And so we're learning about business, we're learning about like marketing and sales. And like one of the things that irks me is that like the marketing in this space is so strong, and like people just say like, oh, we can do, like they have no qualms about saying that they can do something that they absolutely can't do, and like what annoys me is like, I think we're a very like humble company, and it's like not working that well. You know what I mean? Like it's like not, people, our voice is not very loud, and so we're not heard in the market. So we kind of need to figure out how to deal with that. And that annoys me, because sometimes I think like we've got the best product in the market, but it annoys me that more people don't know about it, or that people don't give us a chance, because sometimes you just like don't want to take a risk on like a small startup. And I can understand that, but it still annoys me.
Oh yeah, no, it's a brilliant answer. That's what I wanted to say. Actually, what really annoys, and yeah, that's the challenge, right? When there are too many things, like in RPA tools, there are like 30, 40, 50 of them, maybe 100 of them now. There are now machine vision tools everywhere. There are chatbots everywhere. There are process mining tools everywhere, right? It was before only like 2, 3, 4. Now it's everywhere. So it's becoming extremely difficult to actually even just try one product, because you don't know how would you know if it's a good value product or not, right? Because everybody's saying the same things, always the same things. So yeah. And that's why I wanted to have you here to talk in depth about some things that professionals can ask and like really go deeper, because I knew that you would be able to answer them. So that's, I think, is
absolutely
important one. Another interesting thing you mentioned, that you're actually exporting into BPM annotation, right? So that's interesting case. Do you know any process mining tools that export in BPMN as well, or like process discovery, or it's like your unique feature, or it's a typical one?
I don't know. Actually, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure about that. For us, we have I'm not really sure what other people are doing around that. Our philosophy is that we want to be able to go into your existing workflow, whatever that is. So if you're using Microsoft Word for PDDs, if you're using BPMN, if you're using Excel to do analysis, we just want, we're capturing this data. We want you guys to have access to it. We want you to be able to use it the way that you want to use it. So it was very natural for us to do that BPMN export as a part of that philosophy. I don't know. I don't think there's anything technically challenging about it. So I think that if people are not doing it, that's because they want to keep the users on their platform, like in their software. And that's not really our philosophy today, at least. So so that's why we have that feature.
Okay, fine. So the question was that, can you use the process mining or discovering after you did automation? And will it provide any value? So in my understanding, probably discovery you won't be doing after automation because it does not make much sense to do. You use discovery for automation. If you use mining, that's different because the mining can help you even after automation to identify the variations and where to apply your engineering things. Would this be a correct statement?
So people do use process discovery after the automation, but they're using it in a different context. So if they're using it after the automation, they're using it to measure the new handle time for the process. They're using to measure the improvement that was made to the process as a result of doing it with the robot, let's say. So if you can show in the new process map that there are less errors, that the handle time has been reduced, and the percentage of the cases that are being handled by the bot, you can, articulate to the business, oh, look how successful my RPA program is going. And that to have concrete measurements of that can be valuable. But yeah, in my experience, I think RPA is still early, so people still want to go to the next automation rather than spending time analyzing the existing ones. So I imagine that, I do think it's important to measure. I think it's important to be able to show to the improvement that you made, but I think people don't spend as much time on that now. They're more looking for the next automation opportunity.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and I also think that this kind of analysis you will be able to get from the robot itself, right? Why would you run discovery if you can put this statistic on the robot? So you're analyzing the robot logs, you're analyzing variation within the robot. So after automation in the robot, you have the insights from the robot, or should have, right? If you build properly, because why would you put a recording on the robot?
I don't know, but but interestingly, some people have asked us for that.
Okay.
But I don't know why, but they've said oh, can we record the bot afterwards to see what the new map looks like? But I'm not really sure. I always thought that it was from it, but maybe.
Fair enough. Yeah, well, that's interesting case. Okay, cool. Let's see in the chat. We have a question here from Prabhu. So Prabhu is worried that you need to use GPU on premise.
Yeah. So when we do on-premise deployments, we don't have crazy GPU requirements and stuff. We train all of our models in the cloud. And then whenever we do on-premise deployments, we're deploying pre-trained models. So yeah, there's not actually that much really heavy computation happening.
Last question from my side, and then we'll see what audience can ask. So having in mind that you have your 3 years journey now, and if you knew then what you know now, would you repeat this journey? And if yes or no, what would you change?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's a very difficult challenge, and I think that's why I wouldn't change it, because I'm the kind of person that I tend to get bored very easily, and so this one, Mimica, and everything that we're doing is I'm never bored. There's always something to be better at, to improve at, and to try to figure out. So it's an extremely hard journey. And sometimes I just wish man, I wish I could just snap my fingers and have somebody could give me 50 million in cash or something. And then I can go build the next version. But we're getting there. It's just I wish that maybe it had happened a little bit faster. I think maybe we were a little bit early to the market, as 3 years in now. Even RPA is still mostly in BFSI, banking, financial services, insurance, and hasn't really exploded, maybe as quickly as we would have liked. But I do think one good thing is that people that are in this space, I think, it's logical that you use tools like this. And so the market is sort of aligning with our philosophy. And that's why I wouldn't take it back. I wouldn't do it over again, because I think overall we made the right decisions. Like, it was a good decision to start this company. I think it's the right thing to do to accelerate RPA. I'm a very impatient person, so I kind of just like, I want everything to happen like twice as fast as it does. And we operate in a space where you have very long sales cycles, and you know, it takes a long time to you know, for people to listen to us. And part of that is because we don't have like the Gartner and like, you know, the company size and everything. But you know, it's kind of like you're like pushing this boulder up a hill, and then soon, I think we're like almost at the top where we're going to get it, and then we're going to push it, and then the momentum is just going to carry it from there. So I look forward to like the next year or so. I think it's going to be a good year.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming here. I think it was a great discussion. Guys, any questions so far? We still have about 5 minutes while I'll be recording. So then later we can share with everybody. And after that, I will switch off recording, and you might be able to ask some even harder questions. But any questions on the recording for now? Yeah, I think there was a lot of questions that you already answered in the talk. But I see now how the significant progress in a few years. Like it's really the big piece in this process mapping, and how you mature with these things. It's, I think, what really makes the big difference. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, thanks guys.
Thank you Prabhu. Thank you Nadia.
Yeah, thanks guys for joining us. Yeah, so I'll be switching off recording now, and let's have after the session discussion. So thank you everyone who was listening us and is going to listen us. Thank you, hope it was useful. Stop.